Hey everybody, it's Holly, aka the Scientology, and welcome back to the fifth episode of the data series. Now, we didn't finish data series policy letter number 8, so I thought what we'd do is work on that some more in this episode. I don't know if we're going to finish it or not. I don't know how many pages we have left. I'm going to have to see. But it's a little hot. Got my water. Everybody stay hydrated out there if you're in the East Coast right now. Well, even in America. Um, Over here it's decently hot, so stay hydrated. And let's get started, or let's continue with policy letter 8, titled Sanity. So we're at normal scene.
The reason a fixed idea can get so rooted and so overlooked is that it appears normal or reasonable, and somebody or a lot of somebodies want to believe it.
So I want to know what idea would be an example.
Thus, a fixed idea can become an ideal. It's probably a wrong ideal. Incapable Jap pilots would be a wish for a navy. It'd be wonderful. Red-coated infantry were supposed to be brave and unflinching. In both cases, the ideal is irrational. A rational ideal has this law. The purpose of the activity must be part of the ideal one has for that activity. A navy that has an ideal that the enemy can't fly is stupidly avoiding its own purpose, which is to fight.
So in this case, I think the ideal would be if the Japanese are coming over to fight, if they can fly, we need to be prepared.
British infantry had the purpose of winning wars, not just looking brave. Thus, one can analyze for a sane ideal by simply asking, what's the purpose of the activity? If the ideal is one that forwards that purpose, it will pass for sane.
Now, why do I feel like we've gone over this before? I'm not quite sure why I'm having deja vu right now, but it could be because I recorded this whole thing before.
If the ideal is one that forwards the purpose, it will pass for sane. There are many factors which add up to an ideal scene. If the majority of these forward the purpose of the activity, it can be said to be a sane ideal. If an ideal which does not forward the activity in any way is the ideal being stressed, then a fixed idea is present and had better be inspected.
So, an ideal that doesn't forward the activity, that wouldn't be an ideal. Then people aren't. I think what I'm trying to say is that people here aren't stupid enough to have ideals that conflict with the group or the company or whatever the hell they're trying to present.
This could be said to be a very harsh utilitarian view of things, but it's not. Plays the artistic plays its role in any ideal. Morale has its part in any ideal. An ideal studio for an artist could be very beautiful or very ugly so long as it served him to produce his art. If it was very beautiful yet hindered his artistic activities, it would be a very crazy ideal scene. A handsome factory that produced would be a high ideal, but its nearness to raw materials, transport, and worker housing are the more important factors in the ideal of a factory, and its location in a country where the government made an atmosphere in which production could occur could be an overriding part of an ideal scene.
So the point is, obviously, have a factory where you'll be able to receive materials, transport, worker housing. Usually, factories nowadays don't really have to worry about worker housing. Um, Workers tend to have their own places of residence, unless you have a, what do you call it, company town, like Fordlandia, I think it was. But there were a lot of company towns in the earlier days of the 1900s, where the company dealt with everything, including production, housing, entertainment, and all that stuff.
You have to look at what the area is for before you can say whether it's ideal or not. And if its area is too limited to produce or too expensive for it to be solvent, then it isn't a sane scene. Urges to improve. Sometimes the urge to improve an activity is such that it injures or destroys the activity. If one is familiar with the type of activity, he must also realize that there's a law involved. The fact that something's actually operating insolvent can outweigh the untested advantages of changing it.
I think that it's not a law. I think it's a. I want to say basically what I'm trying to say is something operating insolvent can be made better. You have to test stuff out if you want to know if it's going to work or not.
In other words, an ideal scene might be vastly different, but the actual scene is operating.
There's nothing wrong with having a better operating scene.
So the factor of obsessive change enters. Change can destroy with ferocity.
Change can destroy with ferocity, but change can also improve immensely. I don't know. Basically, it seems like he's saying that any kind of change is now considered obsessive change. He was talking about earlier about reactionaries and people who were against change, but over here it seems like he's saying that he's against change.
Whole areas of London, jammed with small but customer-filled shops, have been swept away to make room for chromium high-rent modern stores which stand empty of buyers. Birmingham, where you could get anything made, had all its tiny craft shops swept away and replaced with high-rent, huge new buildings, all on some progress-crazy psychotic break.
Okay, it's not necessarily a psychotic break. It could be that they wanted to fit more in the area that they had. The government's now going to be making more money renting these, or whatever companies that are renting these properties, or leasing these office buildings. This is not a progress crazy psychotic break. That's society.
Possibly the new stores and the huge new shops fitted somebody's ideal, but they did not match an actual operating environment.
Hubbard, again, seems to be making every business person seem like an absolute moron. Acting like everyone's ideal is not good with production. Is not good for production. There are people whose ideals are perfectly fine for production. They are good operating environments. So I don't know why he's making it seem like they're more common to have an ideal that's garbage.
It is this difference between an ideal scene and a practical scene which brings down many old businesses and civilizations.
Practical can be ideal. Ideal can be practical.
Therefore, to have an ideal, familiarity with what works is desirable. It's quite possible without any familiarity to imagine a successful ideal, but it must not have any fixed ideas in it. It is the fixed idea that knocks a practical operating living environment in the head. Do-gooders are always lazy at this. They see in a row of old shacks, not economic independence and a lazy life, but poverty. So they get a new housing project built, shoot taxes into the sky, put total control on a lot of people, and cave in a society.
Where are you getting this connection?
So they get a new housing project built, shoot taxes into the sky, put total control on a lot of people.
What is your definition of total control in this example? Is he talking about like a homeowners association?
And cave in a society.
Having a housing project is not going to cave in a society. But I do agree sometimes that government doing these things can make it worse for the people at sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. It all depends.
The do-gooders pushing the 19th century fixed idea of the Comte de Saint-Simon to gear the whole economy down to the poorest man in it. In other words, to reward only the downstat. Everyone becomes a slave, of course, but it sure sounds good.
Alright. I have to look up what this Comte de Saint-Simon is, because I have no idea what that means. Okay, so I found somebody named Henri de Saint-Simon. I know I screwed that up. But he was a French political, economic, and socialist theorist and businessman whose thought had a substantial influence on politics, economics, sociology, and the philosophy of science. So his ideals refer to industrialism that called for the creation of an industrial society led by people within what he defined as the industrial class, which was defined as all people engaged in productive work that contributed to society emphasizing scientists and industrialists, but not including engineers, business people, managers, bankers, manual workers, and others. In opposition to the feudal and military system, the former aspect of which had been strengthened by the Restoration, he advocated a form of technocratic socialism, an arrangement whereby industrial chiefs should control society, similar to Plato philosopher kings. Okay. That's just a basic idea. I mean, I still don't completely understand it, but I'm not going to be diving down into every single person Hubbard references. So, the do-gooder is pushing the 19th century fixed idea of this person to gear the whole economy down to the poorest man in it. Whatever.
Newspapermen are probably the world's worst observers. They observe through the fixed ideas of the publisher or the prevailing control group. Their stories are given them before they leave the office, yet their observations advise the public and the government.
So reporters are the world's worst observers. Not necessarily. They can have, well, especially nowadays with video and all that stuff, it's a lot easier to prove something right if you're observing it.
Their stories are given to them before they leave the office, yet their observations advise the public and the government.
Their observations do help advise the public and the government. The outpoints to be found in any contemporary newspaper... Oh, okay.
The outpoints to be found in any contemporary newspaper brand most stories as false before one proceeds more than a paragraph.
I want to see an example of a contemporary newspaper brand that he was referring to with outpoints. Because he loves to spout this garbage, but he never loves to prove any of it. He just expects you to take it at his word that any contemporary newspaper has most stories false in the first paragraph. So, prove it, Hubbard.
Yet this is what the world public is expected to run on. Naturally, it distorts the scene toward raving insanity. This conflicts with the native logic of people, so the public thinks the world a lot madder than it really is. In 2 cities, all newspapers were suspended from publication for quite a period. In both, crime dropped to 0.
Okay, huge claim here. What 2 cities, what newspapers, and prove the criminal statistic. Big claim, big evidence.
And resumed again when newspapers were again published. The ideal scene of the citizen in his workaday world is vastly different than the scene depicted in the newspaper. The difference between the two can make one feel quite weird. Thus, there should not be too wide a difference between the ideal and the represented scene, and not too wide a difference between the ideal and the actual scene. Reality consists of the isness of things.
All right, we're going to go into isness, all this ness stuff that Hubbard likes to talk about.
One can improve upon this isness to bring about an ideal and lead reality up to it. This is normal improvement and is accepted as sane. One can also degrade the reality by dropping the representation of the scene well below the actual. In the black propaganda work traditionally carried on by many governments, this latter trick of corrupting reality is the means used to foment internal revolt and war.
I mean, I agree. Propaganda can lead to fear and war, especially in places like Russia and North Korea, where they're giving you propaganda every freaking day.
Both actions of upgrade and downgrade are outpoints when reported as facts. We made $1,000 in reserves this week is as crazily outpoint as the government went broke this week, when either one is not the truth. When the report says we should plan a higher income, it's leading to a higher ideal and is not an outpoint mainly because it's not representing any fact, but a hopeful and ambitious management.
Is this an outpoint or is this just a lie? I think they're just lies. But, alright. I've already gone on for long enough. We're at 5 points. We've got a little under 2 pages left. So, I want to thank all of you guys for listening. Like if you like the video, dislike if you don't. I don't really care. Comment with your feedback or questions, good, bad, or sideways. Comment if you want to talk about how crazy Hubbard is for some of his sentences with no evidence whatsoever. And subscribe to be kept up to date on future content. I'll talk to all of you later. See ya.